So this week we're going to have a look at another area that's causing financial problems for local councils across England, and that's how they're able to look after our elderly and vulnerable citizens, adult social care. Because what we've seen in the last 8 years of Tory government is local councils have lost around £7 billion of funding to provide social services. These are important services that councils by law have to provide, but the government isn't giving them the money to do that. And the King's Fund estimates that by 2020 there'll be about a £1.5 billion funding gap between what councils have and what they need to be able to deliver even the most basic social services. And you know, in the last week we've heard pledges from the government to give more money to the National Health Service, but not a penny of that extra money will go to social care. So let's look at what's being proposed. So the government has announced £20 billion for the NHS, which sounds a significant amount of money. But when you look at the history of NHS spending since 1948, you soon realise that it's a drop in the ocean for what the NHS actually needs. For most of the period from 1948 until 1997, the NHS under all governments, Labour and Conservative, received just under 4% a year on average budget growth. Under the Labour governments of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, it achieved a 6% average level of growth, which came crashing down to 1% under the coalition government and is broadly just around 2% under Theresa May's government. This latest announcement will give it a 3.36% annual increase on average, still way below the 4% the NHS says it needs each year to keep up with demand. Social care services are key, and cuts are impacting on the lives of far too many. There are now 1.2 million older people in England living with unmet care needs, according to Age UK. And there are 400,000 fewer people now receiving publicly funded social care services than there were in 2010, even though demand for those services is now rising. And yet when you look at what's been proposed, squeezing social care funding is a false economy. It leads to more hospital stays, costing the taxpayer between £600 and £900 a night. I challenged this Tory government. The answers that I received simply weren't good enough. Mr. Speaker, 1.2 million older people in England living with unmet care needs, according to Age UK. Over 400,000 fewer people are receiving publicly funded social care than in 2010. Council spending on adult social care fell by 10% in real terms between 2010 and 2015, and a miserly £150 million in funding announced for 2018-19 in the local government finance settlement. And now we hear, Mr. Speaker, that there's no funding for social care in yesterday's NHS announcement. So with social care in crisis, putting pressure on the NHS, sending councils across England towards bankruptcy, when's this minister going to do his job and secure the resources that our councils need to give the elderly the dignity they so desperately deserve? So I'm here with Barbara Keeley, who's Labour's Shadow Cabinet Minister responsible for social care. Barbara, tell us what Labour proposes to do to help tackle the care crisis.
Pleased to do that. Labour pledged at the general election last year that we would put £8 billion extra into social care in this Parliament, with £1 billion up front this year to ease the crisis. What that would really do, Andrew, is it would help with funding a lift in quality through paying care staff the real living wage. It would also mean we could afford extra publicly funded care packages for people in need, because there's a great 400,000 people extra since 2010 have not been getting those publicly funded care packages. Our longer term plan is to develop a national care service that would sit and work alongside the NHS, but be focused on trying to keep people independent and keeping people in their own homes where possible, and be integrated as time goes on, integrating with health services. I think the key other thing is support for carers. It's been very disappointing to see that the promised national carer strategy from this government was abandoned, and a rather weak carers action plan came out instead. The last carer strategy, national carer strategy, was from the Labour government in 2008. We would have a proper national carer strategy so that we can make sure that we work with carers to help them give the care they give and support them in doing that.
Thank you, Barbara. That is really important, because for too often carers, people who are looking after our elderly, disabled and vulnerable, are often overlooked, and it's about time that government was on their side as well. But I think the message is clear. Local authorities that are currently cash-strapped, that have had resources taken away for providing social care, are going to have a government on their side. They're going to have a Labour government committed to giving them the resources and the tools to be able to help people who need the help of social care and social services. And that's really important, because our elderly, our disabled, our vulnerable deserve dignity in care. They deserve the best care that money can provide. And only a Labour government is committed to putting the resources where it's needed, so that we have a care service fit for the many and not the few.